Hi, my name is Gerhard Schwantner. Welcome to our webinar. Today we'll discuss a very interesting subject, the top three sales activities that really predict revenue. We want to separate hype from reality. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our presenter, Eric Esfahinian. He is Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing. Thanks for joining us, Eric.
Thank you.
So can we talk about today's agenda? Can we start with that?
Sure. So today we're going to be talking about trying to understand about what activities are going to be the most effective ways to improve the performance of your sales team. I think the key distinction that we're making here is separating hype from reality. Top three sales activities that really predict revenue. So when I say hype, what I'm talking about primarily is the noise that's created now for the past few years around sales enablement, sales acceleration, technology and tools that are in principle designed to drive effectiveness, shorten sales cycles, improve the ability for reps to do their jobs better, with ultimately a goal of rising revenue, increasing growth, and customer satisfaction. But amongst all of the hype and all of the noise, there's an opportunity really for smart sales leaders to really go back to basics and understand exactly what the purpose of sales acceleration ultimately is, which happens to be measuring and managing the effectiveness of their teams in order not necessarily to rely so much on the 80-20 rule as improve the average effectiveness of the reps that they're responsible for, because that's really the charter of any sales manager. And amongst all that technology, you can't lose sight of the underwriting principle, and that's what we see very, very much within our client base, within the marketplace today. Because as much as we want to talk about enablement and gamification and really cool things like visualization, in reality, we're spending a tremendous amount of money on technology tools, more and more each year. Even CRM alone, 26 in a little bit $1 billion every year, growing still in double digits, which is quite a surprise. However, the reality is that less than half of the deals that are forecasted to close within CRM actually close. So as much as there's a real thrust of technology, sales managers and leaders have to really think critically about what their job is, what the responsibilities of the reps are, and make sure that they're applying technology sparingly in order to really not get caught up in screens and widgets and cool bleeding edge stuff when at the end of the day you're just trying to increase the effectiveness of your team. And that's really the juxtaposition between the hype and the craziness and the noise and the reality that we're all faced with. So before we get into the actual activities that are the most important ones to measure and manage, it's really important to talk about accuracy. The prior slide talked about less than half the deals that are forecasted to close within most CRMs actually close. And a lot of that comes from a lack of real clarity and accuracy in the data that managers are using in order to forecast, in order to budget, in order to plan. The more visibility managers have into what their reps are doing every day and how they're doing it and the outcomes, the better decisions they're going to be able to make and the more reliable and predictable their efforts are going to be. There's a tremendous amount of waste and loss when it comes to the impact of not accurate CRM data. So all these things, all these KPIs, all these activities that we discuss about improving our team with, it's predicated entirely on the accuracy of the information that you have today. Now, where CRM systems fall short is many, many areas, but the key here is the accuracy of the information that's being put in there. Why? Because reps don't want to necessarily go into CRM at the end of the week. They're usually begged to by their managers. The information, if it arrives in CRM, is often very, very brief. Had a good meeting, follow up next week. Or it doesn't ever even make it in there because reps want to sell. Reps don't want to go in and do data entry into their CRM because their boss is nagging them about it. So because of this reality, and it's been a reality for a very long time, Managers don't really know what's going on out there. They're basing their management techniques and training and coaching around hunches, gut feeling, things like that. And CRM, in many cases, was designed to really eliminate that and be that central hub. But more often than not, the information around the sales activity that your reps are out there conducting is often inaccurate and incomplete. And the data that you have reported in there isn't really validated by outcomes. You know, like that last bullet says, you know, if a deal has an 80 or 90% probability of closing at the end of this month, what are the odds that deal is going to close if the rep hasn't spoken to the prospect in 2 months? Much lower, but the rep is always very susceptible to optimism, happy ears, you name it. So the 4 must-haves for accurate sales forecasting, which is really a prerequisite to measuring and managing sales activity and important KPIs, is you have to simplify and automate the capture of this activity. You can't continue to rely on the reps to do it themselves, hoping that they are complete about it, and rolling the dice and hoping for the best. Data capture for activities needs to be automated. It needs to be available all the time, anytime, in an up-to-date format. It needs to be in context. Your reps are generating presumably a tremendous amount of data. You have to be able to, as a manager, interpret it quickly. You're not going to want to spend your time going through spreadsheets and columns and rows of data to try to find that one element that you can use to coach and train. And ultimately, that data needs to be tied to outcomes. What are the goals? What are the priorities of my team when they're on the phone talking to their customers and talking to their prospects? And what is all that activity they're generating? How is that related to the outcomes themselves? Because as a manager, we get back to basics, and you realize you can't manage what you can't measure. And if you can't manage something, you can't improve something. So with all the hype and all the craziness out there, it's really important not to lose sight of what our goals are as managers and sales leaders today. So you gotta have accuracy. So going into the sales activity, this presentation is really designed to key off of 3 key sales activities that are essential to managing and improving the effectiveness of your team and making revenue generation more predictable than it is today. And sales activity number 1 is call to contact ratios. Something as simple as that. What is it? How many call attempts does it take to initiate a live conversation? It's really like the baseline metric for measuring the effectiveness of a sales rep, of a team, of an office, of a region. Many companies don't measure this, but it is really essential to knowing what your reps are doing out there, whether they're in a centralized office or they're out in the field, whether they're on the phone 6 hours a day or whether they're making 5 or 10 calls a day at most. This visibility for a manager is essential, and this gets really to the heart of where CRM tends to fall off, is in these types of activities that are important, but they often don't make it into a CRM. This is not just for telemarketers, it's also for customer service personnel. How many initiated conversations are my reps having? What is happening on those conversations? Really essential. I think right now we have a poll that we're going to put up, so I'd ask everybody to take a look at the poll and weigh in.
And I want to chime in and invite the audience to ask questions when they pop in your mind. And actually, we have a quick question while everybody's polling. Eric, with mobile devices, reps can use apps to report on progress. What do you think?
I think it's great. I think that it's better than what many companies are using today. Most of the times these reps are calling from their own personal devices, and it's good to have some tool that reinforces the behavior of logging your activity. But I would caution 2 things. Number 1, you want to make sure that activity is automated as best as possible. Again, getting to that reliability of the data. Subjective is tougher, objective is better. And then the other thing is, if you have reps using different apps or different tools on their phones and you give them that leeway, then you as a manager are going to have to sort of pull together all these different data sources and find a way to make sense of them. So it's better to have sort of a standard process, but even starting out small and saying, okay, we want all your reps to have the ability to log their activity from anywhere is a good start.
So let's look at the poll results.
So 44 to 56. That's very, very good. That's very good. We talked to a lot of clients at Griffin Networks, which is my company, and we're surprised at how the larger the organization is, the less visibility the client has to what those key ratios are. And still, it's the minority, so there's a lot of room for improvement. But if you go back maybe 20 years, this was sort of the most basic element of managing your sales team is how many calls they make today, how many conversations did they have. So somewhere along the way, I think many managers and companies lost sight of the importance of that piece of it, and that's a key aspect to trying to bring it back. Is going back to if you can measure the activities that lead to revenue, you're far better able to control the actual opportunities that lead to revenue as well. Sales activity predicts revenue. Gerhard, anything surprising about these results?
Well, I would have expected a higher number of yes, but that's my personal bias. But what you said earlier, if you don't measure it, you cannot change it, and you cannot improve it. And that's why it's so important to have a better set of metrics and better tools to measure the activity intelligently, so it helps the salesperson and helps the company.
That's exactly right. So we're going to move back to the presentation. Let's see. So sales activity number 1, calls to contact. And why it matters, at the end of the day, sales reps are paid for performance. And I think the management mentality has always been for a long time, listen, if Joe was a producer, you know what, I don't really care how many calls he makes. If he makes his number, that's fine with me. But as the cost to onboard, hire, and train reps and manage them and coach them gets higher and higher, you can no longer rely on, again, like we said before, the 80-20 rule, and that if a rep doesn't perform, the rep is not going to be around very long because there's a lot of inefficiencies in that approach. So at a very baseline level, understanding how many calls it takes for a rep to get a contact, it takes for a team to get a contact is going to be very helpful in then backward establishing goals and standards for the reps when they come on board. Because if a rep isn't generating activity, they're not doing their job as part of it. All new revenue opportunities start with activity, and many of the best and most effective activities are generated on the telephone. In spite of what many of the social sellers will tell you, I think the history is bear that out. So sales activity number 2, and this was an interesting one because over the past year or so, we really learned a lot about the importance of call attempt frequency. Call attempt frequency is, the idea is very simple, is how many times does a rep make a phone call to a number before they give up? The vast majority of sales calls are dialed fewer than 3 times. We have clients where they'll make 1 million calls a day and they will dial 1 time. 90% of them will be one and done dials. So if you're a company that purchases leads and distributes them to your sales reps, that's very expensive. The vast majority of calls that are dialed more than 6 times are 2, 3, 4 times more likely to convert and close. However, 90%, 80% of calls are dialed once, twice, if that at all. So from a management standpoint of leads and tracking, which one of my reps is doing a good job, which one of my reps is more likely to convert this lead as opposed to burn it or waste it, you start getting into some real interesting opportunities. So why it matters is because persistence is critical to dialing and using the phone to outreach to customers and prospects. 7, 8, or 9 times you call a number, you're 4 times more likely to get that person to set an appointment with you or close a sale with you. So what you can do as a manager with this information in managing and being able to measure call attempt frequency of your reps, dials, leads, the impact can be very, very dramatic. If you take that 90% one and done number and you pull that down to 80 to 70% through good solid management and reinforcement and tracking, the impact on your top line number will be dramatic and significant because you're doubling, you're quadrupling the likelihood of being effective on that phone call. And once reps are faced with that accurate reality, it makes it a lot easier to convince them to make those 7, 8, 9 dials because they know they're 4 times more likely to get the result they're looking for.
Are there any standards that you can share how many calls a rep should make during a day, or how many dial attempts?
Yes, I do, Gerhard. The sweet spot is 7, 8, 9.
Okay.
At the 7th, 8th, and 9th dial of a number, in general, and it does vary a bit industry to industry, by the 7th, 8th, or 9th dial, you are 3 to 4 times more likely to get that appointment set or get that sale than the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. And it's dramatic. And with that in mind, I mean, it seems like it's almost common sense, but you'd be surprised at how many people have gone years and years with 90% of their leads being dialed once and then never dialed again. And CRM does not do a good job on its own of giving you that level of insight. And that's precisely why it's a sales activity that is predictive of revenue, because it's something that's sort of hidden, but very, very significant once you can get your arms around it.
And do you have a recommended number of how many conversations a salesperson should have during the day?
You know, that also varies by industry, Gerhard. We typically like to say between 10 and 20, and there is variance because it depends on what you're selling. It depends on whether you're selling something that's a little bit more transactional versus strategic. You know, we have you know, a lot of experience with clients who we've worked with directly, and how many conversations we've had to have before the deal closes. And we're in a business where the sales cycle is somewhat long, but we've seen 80, 90 interactions either on the phone or meetings before a deal closes. So that's a tremendous amount of activity. It's a tremendous amount of work. So it has to pay off, and you have to manage it tightly. It's not something that you have an unlimited amount of resource for. So that's critical. And what we found also is that though meetings, face-to-face meetings, are really, really important, the real work in the executing and the advancement of a sales cycle is done on that telephone, either in direct one-on-one conversations or phone-based conference calls, etc. So meetings are great as events and relationship builders, but the heavy, heavy lifting is happening on the phone. It's not happening via email, and believe it or not, it's not happening in those meetings.
The other question we had to what you said, 7, 8, 9 calls. Is it making 7 or 8 and 9 calls to the same number on the same day, or across some duration, such as a week or weeks?
No, it's over. It was measured based on attempts over the life cycle of the lead itself. So it wasn't measured against in a day. And in many cases, you'd probably get a lot of complaints if you were having your reps call somebody over and over again on the same day. Right. It was really just touches and attempts as opposed to conversions. So it's usually, you know, between the period of if a campaign's lasting 2 weeks or a month or 2 months.
Got it. It makes a lot of sense. And somebody else is asking to please define your terms a little bit more specifically, like what does somewhat long mean in terms of sales cycle, or what does dramatic mean?
Sure.
So what is a somewhat long sales cycle mean?
Very good point. The sales cycle at my company generally tends to be between 6 and 9 months. So for some industries, that's a very good point. If you're selling airplanes, maybe that's a very short sales cycle, but for other industries and other products, it's quite long. We do have sales cycles that go 2 and 3 years, if you could believe it. So that's really the long sales cycle. I'll try to be more specific in some of these terms. As far as the dramatic impact, there's a couple slides down the road a little bit that I think will really quantify what dramatic impact is with these activities, these KPIs.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem at all. So calls to contacts is the first sales activity. call attempt frequency is the second sales activity. The third sales activity, again, we're not going too crazy with this stuff. Contact to close ratio. And what that means, it means how many conversations do your reps need to have in order to get the desired outcome, the close. So for some of Griffin's clients, the close is an appointment set. A good percentage of them, the goal is to set a meeting, to set an appointment. So they're generating their activity with a goal of setting the appointments, and the conversations go in a number of different ways, and there can be any one of a host of outcomes, but that is the real goal. What is your priority for your team when they get on the phone and talk to prospects and talk to customers? So very similar to the call to contact ratio, the contact to close ratio is significant because now you're starting to get into the effectiveness of the individual reps, the techniques, the capabilities that reps have in order to get the desired result. Because once you have that information, then you can begin to start provisioning your reps, setting goals, establishing baselines that are driving towards this close and increasing the likelihood and the conversion of those calls, those conversations turning into revenue. Very, very significant. Conversational effectiveness, the things they're saying on the phone, how long are they spending on the phone with a prospect or a customer. There's usually a sweet spot, longer than a minute, but shorter than 5 minutes. For other industries, it's longer. The longer is the better. You're building a relationship with these folks. If you're not cold prospecting, but you're actually doing more customer service, you would expect a little bit of a longer conversation. But you can have long conversations, but you need to be making sure you're converting those into the close. Long conversations with not desirable outcomes isn't really useful for anyone. And it's very important to point out the definition of what a contact is. And we've dealt with this with our clients for years now. For some folks, a contact is basically a pickup. I'll make a phone call, and once the voicemail picks up or somebody picks up, that's a contact. For other clients, they're going to want a contact to be nothing less than 30 seconds because that'll be able to be enough time to go past most voicemail systems. And on average, that means there's at least some live interaction with a customer or a prospect that you can measure. So when you talk about contact, it can't just be a straightforward number. You have to figure out, all right, what do we define a contact as? How does my company and my team, how are they going to know what's a contact and what is just, say, a voicemail or a hang up? So if you're going to manage this, you obviously have to measure it accurately. This is really the true metric that managers need to be looking at for their reps in order to be able to identify who are my top performers, who are my middle of the pack, who are the folks that need a little bit more coaching, a little bit more training. And this really is, as the slide indicates, this really does control that lever of activity, because if you can identify the behaviors and the techniques and the patterns of activity that your reps who have the best conversation to close ratios, then you're going to be able to showcase those and give your middle of the pack or your new hires a clear understanding of the behaviors that drive success. We like to say at Griffin that it's almost like two-way accountability. You're holding your reps accountable for a certain level of sales activities, and then if they're doing those activities and they're meeting the standard that you set for them, then the accountability falls back on you, the manager, to coach them, train them, optimize with them if they're doing all that activity and they're not getting the results that you expect. So I think that two-way accountability is key. When you have visibility that's accurate into the activities that get results and the ones that don't, and you can manage everyone to that standard, suddenly it changes the whole relationship between a manager and a rep, because then it's a mutual effort. It's not just manager bearing down on the reps, telling them to log their stuff and saying you're not doing your job. The idea of managing to a standard is pure gold. So now we're going to spend a moment and talk about a case study for a client that really took these ideas to heart, accurately measuring KPIs that drove effectiveness for their sales team. And before I do, Gerhard, I just wanted to see if there were any questions that we could address prior to getting into the case study?
Yeah, there are a number of questions I was trying to hold off, so you don't lose your momentum. There are also a lot of interesting comments. Today there are a lot of robots answering the phone, so a lot of times our calls do not get through. So how do you feel about a multimedia approach? For example, social media, phone calls, emails, and cold calling. Good question.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and it's something that we get quite a bit. And I like to take the approach of really all channels all the time. What that means is you want to be able to communicate with your customers and prospects in the way that's most effective for you, but also convenient for them. So what I coach my sales folks to do is, if you make a phone call and you leave a voicemail, also send them an email and give them the opportunity to choose which channel they prefer best to get back to you, if at all. Now, of course, many of them never get answered, never get replied. I think that's sort of par for the course. But by giving them two opportunities to communicate back with you, you're making it that much easier for them to respond to you. And we definitely want to be able to touch our prospects and customers in a bunch of different ways. But what I also do is I always caution clients that I talk to, I caution them not to lean too heavily on email or lean too heavily on certainly social, because in some industries it's very effective, but by and large it's nowhere near as effective as all the attention and hype and noise that's being created around social. We sort of go back to this back to basics approach, saying at the end of the day the telephone is essential. You cannot abandon it. And too many companies, and too many reps themselves, I think it's a little bit human nature. I think many reps would rather send an email than make a phone call, or update Facebook than make a phone call, because I think there's that fear of direct rejection. That's a human element that sales reps really need to get beyond if they're going to really grow and thrive and prosper. So you definitely want to use all channels, but make sure that you are ensuring they're not just abandoning the telephone altogether, because I think that happens from time to time, and that is a mistake when you just take the phone channel out of it, because at the end of the day, that's your opportunity to build that one-to-one relationship with your clients. If you're doing it well, you're miles ahead of your competition.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I've heard many stories. There's one particular story where a speaker / author had an inside salesperson to make calls to to sell books and sell speaking services, and then social media came along, and that speaker then invested like $60,000 in a very elaborate, intricate social media campaign to promote the next book, and got a lot of publicity, a lot of action, and a lot of kudos on social media, a lot of retweets, a lot of likes, but zero sales. Zero. So I think the lesson to be learned is to balance your channels and measure the effectiveness of each channel and how it contributes to your end results. And I think that you don't want to go from 80% phone calling and 20% social media to flipping it without doing a gradual test. What if I did a little bit more here, a little bit more there? What is the impact on the bottom line?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head right there. We sometimes see these dramatic shifts. My business development reps will come to me and say, listen, we just talked to XYZ company, and they told us that they don't use the phone anymore, that they're going to be moving all of their marketing and their sales activity into email and into social. And the question, well, what do we do about that? Well, I mean, the reality is that's a really risky proposition, and even the companies that say they're doing that, in the back of their mind, they're probably wondering whether it's going to be too risky for them, because I can tell you the companies that are ceding that ground on the phone, their competitors are doubling down in that area because it just works better. I'll give you an example. We just had a conference that we attended and presented about a week ago, and we did some outbound calling to drive attendance and to hopefully initiate some meetings at this conference, we did a combination of emails as well as phone calls. Emails, very easy to overlook, very easy to gloss over, very easy for the prospects to delete. Phone calls, the people we had conversations with, I think almost every one of them was visiting with us, and we were able to have a meeting. Simply, they would have ignored our email, and in many cases they did, but it's that outreach on the phone, the good timing combined with persistence that made that prospect, created that relationship and that almost that loyalty to go, oh, I got to go visit the folks over at Griffin. That doesn't happen on email, and in our experience, it doesn't really happen on social alone. But if you have an integrated strategy and you have an email that you're touching them with, and you have a phone call that you're hitting them with every now and then, over time, you're going to get them. You're going to basically become a known quantity to these folks, which is going to give you a much higher likelihood of getting the success you're looking for.
So one quick question. Somebody says we are a very small business, under 10 people, don't have the resources to measure sales reps' performance unless we do it the old-fashioned way by logging, which is very difficult and to implement. Any recommendations on how I can do this? Can I affordably measure my KPIs?
So great question. You probably have noticed by now, these KPIs aren't heavy technology driven. They're fairly basic, but within a non-centralized environment, they're just tough to get your hands around. So my advice would be, you have to create a culture that values activity logging. And if it has to be manual, well, then it's something that is manual in a way that is affordable to you and works for your rep and doesn't add too much process to the equation. But it has to be something that you require from all your reps in a standard way, and that you work with them in review on a regular basis, just to right out of the gate. It's okay if you're going to have a little bit of variance or a little bit of dropping of activity because of omissions or whatever. But if you don't have that culture that values and measures activity, it's going to be very difficult to get that down the road after they've already ingrained their bad behaviors and they're out in the Wild West, and then you come back and try to rein them in. It's a little bit more difficult. So I think you just have to really communicate clearly and effectively on what your expectation is in terms of the activities and the logging and the importance of accuracy. And then you have to do it, collect it on a regular basis, and review it with them on a regular basis so that they know that's one of the baseline expectations that they can expect if they work for you.
Awesome. Let's take a look at the case study. I think that's going to be a very, very interesting topic of follow-up questions for the audience. And I want to thank everybody for submitting excellent questions. So keep them coming.
Terrific. And yeah, it is a very exciting story. So we had a client that really had a large, highly distributed sales organization. And this was a team that was responsible for outbound outreach via the telephone to customers and to prospects. And they were looking for ways to improve their growth and their revenue. Now, for this company in particular, fully half of their growth strategy for their sales team relied on appointment setting, relied on the reps reaching out to prospects, leads, customers, and setting appointments that they would go in and hopefully convert to obtain new customers or upsell or cross-sell. The problem was their folks were highly distributed. They were calling from all different types of devices. They were a company that's been around a very long time, so there really wasn't that culture of measurement that we just spoke of a moment ago. And managers had this gigantic visibility gap to what their reps were doing out there in the field versus the revenue that was actually brought in the door at the end of every month or every quarter. A tremendous challenge, and they couldn't give everybody lockdown phones. They couldn't put everybody in a big office and measure them like a call center. It was very difficult to take the reps' self-reported activities and make any sense at all of it. And because this was responsible for almost half of the growth of the company, it was highly strategic and a real significant pain point for them. So what they were able to do is deploy cloud services that basically captured in the phone every outbound phone-based communication that every one of their reps conducted every day from whatever phone or office or location that the reps happened to be in, capturing the information, the call detail, who they called, how long they were on the phone, what happened on the call. All this data was captured in the network automatically, didn't require the reps themselves to do any logging of themselves, so the data was very, very accurate. And then they used dashboard views to give the managers instant context into all that activity being generated by thousands and thousands of reps. It gave them context to what was happening, and they could look at it for 2-3 minutes a day and know exactly where to put their management's attention. The alternative is sifting through spreadsheets at best, trying to measure whether this activity is legit or whether it's just, you know, a rep sort of gaming the system, so to speak, because when you have thousands of reps, it makes it very difficult to know who's who. You don't really have a good, clear understanding of everybody who's out there representing your brand and calling on your behalf. But what being able to capture and get a real sort of a report card on all this activity that was being generated, the impact was profound, and I'll quantify that in a second. But the idea of having even 200 reps out there, I think managers have this notion that they know what their reps are doing, and if you ask them some questions around how many calls they make a day or how much they spend on the phone a day, often it's very skewed upward, because what we found is less than half of the reps in this use case were making anywhere near the number of calls that they were required to every day. But every time, you know, a VP would talk to one of the managers, they would have full participation. Oh, the reps are all on the phone, they made all their calls. There was really no visibility. So when we turned this capability on for them, it was amazing what they saw, because they saw finally for the first time what's really going on with their field. How many people are really making calls? Why is it that we have 400 people who haven't made a single call in a month? What are they doing? You know, these types of things. And you know it's accurate, so you don't have to question or rely on, you know, supposition or a conversation with the rep themselves. So they were able to establish, all right, from this point on, here's what you have to, here's the number of calls you have to make every single day without exception. And once you have that off of the data, then you can now manage to this standard, and really just that alone, that visibility to what the reps are doing, is going to make the reps perform at a higher level. Just knowing that they're now being tracked and measured, you're going to get 5%, 10% improvements in effectiveness, in activity, because now they know they're being reviewed regularly, and it's not reliant on the rep themselves telling us what they're doing, like the fox guarding the hen house. This information is being captured automatically. So what were the results? We talked a little bit ago about call frequency. So many leads were being called. There was 91, I think, were one and done leads, meaning the rep called the lead one time and never again. But 98% were called fewer than 3 times. And they were one of the examples that we had used in our pilot around, you know, 7, 8, and 9 being the sweet spot for them. And they were fully 4 times more likely to get the appointment set after the 6th dial. And as you can see, 98% of the reps weren't even calling more than 3 times. So you talk about dramatic, and you talk about quantify that. That's significant, because if you can quadruple your likelihood of success with a dial on a phone number, that's going to make a difference, because these folks knew how many appointments were converted into actual revenue, and they knew what that revenue was on an annualized basis. And the impact was nothing short of impressive. But by creating those minimal activity standards, they were able to effectively roll out for the first time a calling strategy. A strategy that said, okay, this is how we approach our outreach to prospects from our sales organization. Communicate it clearly, and measure it consistently, and not have to rely on, you know, hope and luck, and, you know, expecting that the reps are going to do the right thing, and then finding out they didn't, and, you know, you're kind of in the hole. By communicating a call strategy across the entire organization, the effectiveness was driven much, much more reliably than it ever could prior, which was really just a strategy, like I said, of maybe a spreadsheet or weekly con calls with the managers, and then rolled up to senior managers who were going to basically budget and forecast for their entire business off of this data that's less than half accurate. So it was very, very dramatic. They also relied on this idea, and this touches a little bit on the gamification element, but the ability to see top performers and bottom performers. So you could begin to identify the top performers, and yes, maybe Diana made a ton of calls today or this week, but her percentage of actual conversions to appointments is fairly low. If you identify someone like Thomas, who's, they're not making as many calls as Diana, but you know what? Thomas is actually far more effective at converting those calls. What are the implications of bumping Thomas's activity up a little bit, his call attempts? Or what are the implications of coaching Diana a little bit to take some of Thomas's techniques, and will that supercharge her overall effectiveness, which at the end of the day is the job of the manager to begin with. And these leaderboards really serve as like a self-motivation for rep to rep, office to office, and it did sort of change the way these folks structured their interactions with their teams, with their offices, and even with their senior executives. Any questions at this point?
Well, I'm really impressed with that case study. There are a ton of questions, and
okay.
I'm trying to, and I want to thank everybody for contributing so richly. This webinar is really amazing because of the quality of the participants and the quality of the questions. Quick, what CRM programs do you integrate with beyond Salesforce? Does your program automatically populate the CRM software we use? Good question.
The question is great. We integrate as a managed package with Salesforce today. We also have integrations with a number of smaller or homegrown systems that our clients have deployed. We also have a supported mobile integration with Microsoft Dynamics. And in those cases, you have automatic logging of activity into CRM. So, I mean, from the rep's perspective, it takes a lot of that away from them to have to do it. Nobody likes to do it. So this takes a step away from them, saves them maybe 20% of their week to do other things, revenue generating things, not just updating CRM. So, and really it's a fairly straightforward integration with CRM, but it does depend on the customization of your CRM integration and the vendor and some of the other little details. But it is very important. The idea of being able to auto log is essential to being able to deploy this throughout the organization.
Eric, there are a number of questions that have to do with optimizing the salesperson's time, and I'm going to give you several. What time should a customer be called for maximum results or outcomes, and how many emails normally should be sent to a customer? There's one more. What are prime telemarketing hours? I think those are all important questions that we could bundle together.
Mm-hmm. Great question. We have done analysis, and for the folks who are on this webinar, if you'd like, we could get your information, and we could actually send you a white paper on exactly what two of those questions were about regarding the best time of day to call, best day of week to call. We've been in the path of some of the largest organizations outbound phone calling for now 18 years. So you talk about big data. I mean, we've been sitting in the path of these calls for a very long time, so we have a tremendous amount of data from which we do our analysis for things like call attempt frequency or best day of week, best week of the month, best hour of the day. And it does vary from industry to industry. There are some conventional wisdom type things that are pretty obvious, like within working hours on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. We were surprised because there's other outliers that show Sunday afternoon, believe it or not, is one of the best times to get an appointment in certain industries. And who would think that Sunday afternoon is a good time to call ever? So we have a whole white paper on that, and I welcome anybody who's interested. We could send that out after this webinar and give you all the detail. Regarding the question around email, I don't have an answer for that. I'm going to be honest. I don't know what the optimal number of emails that should go out, because emails are kind of a funny animal, because you have campaign-based emails, HTML, and then you have direct one-to-one emails to customers and prospects. And what I would suggest is you want to get into a rhythm. You don't want to email somebody every day. You don't want to call somebody necessarily every day and leave a voicemail. So you want to get into a cadence and a rhythm that allows you to alternate between emails and phone calls at a rhythm that's appropriate for the type of selling that you're doing. Maybe it's twice a week, maybe it's once every 2 weeks. It does depend on what you're selling and who you're doing your outreach to. Is it a customer to follow up or possibly cross-sell, or is it a cold prospect who doesn't know anything about you and that's your job is to go and talk to them? So it does vary quite a bit.
Yeah, my recommendation is to try different channels. So if you have sent 3 emails, you haven't gotten a response, you may want to, if you have the cell number, you may want to text the prospect, did you get a chance to read my email? Or you want to leave a message and refer to the email so that the customer knows that you would like to get a response, you want to reestablish a connection, or you simply go on connect with the customer or prospect on LinkedIn and send an email, in-mail, because it's another channel. And then customers sort of put two together and say, well, this is someone that doesn't take no for an answer, and I have been busy, and then they apologize, sorry, I've been traveling, and then you reestablish the connection again.
That's right. So I think to summarize, all channels and be persistent without being overwhelming. I think that's really the key. So just touching on the real key quantifiable outcomes of measuring the right sales activities, if you're doing it properly. This is a client of ours that used a measurement system for outbound selling activity and was able to increase their rep effectiveness to setting appointments by 1%. And that 1% per rep across the organization resulted in $12 million additional per month in new revenue. So we talk about dramatic impact of doing something as seemingly simple as measuring call attempt frequency, but this can really have an impact in a meaningful way and in a sustained way. It's not just you're getting one bump or you're avoiding having to pay for something else, so you preserve some money, you save some money. This is your revenue creation engine. Slight optimizations using measurement and benchmarking, $12 million a month is real meaningful effectiveness gains. We talked a little bit about the challenges of hiring and onboarding. What is the expectation for a new rep coming on board? How do they know what success looks like, what it sounds like? By being able to measure what your top performers are doing and showcase that activity and root out some of the bad behaviors, you're going to significantly be able to reduce the amount of time you have to onboard a new rep, because you're going to set a standard day one, and then you're going to measure against that standard that's accurate and quantifiable. You're absolutely going to be able to get that person up to speed more quickly. You're going to be able to get them productive more quickly. And depending on what you spend in your average onboarding of a new hire, you're going to be able to save money in doing this onboarding in less time than you would without this level of visibility, without this level of activity. And then finally, we talk about selling a lot and outreach and prospecting. But for a lot of our clients, it comes down to almost like a customer service effort, improving customer retention or decreasing churn by doing something as simple as measuring touch points between a rep and a customer at some regular interval. Maybe it's twice a month, maybe it's once every quarter. Whatever it is for your business, by doing a continuous periodic touch to your customers, you are reducing the likelihood of that customer going away, because of now they feel like they have a better relationship. You can send emails all day and night. It's not going to build that one-to-one relationship like an unsolicited outbound phone call to that customer at a periodic interval over time. And we had one client who did this, and they reduced their customer churn by 4% in a year, which for them, they were a very large company. For them, it was dramatic, to the tune of $20, $30 million saved. So these are real impacts that are happening by doing something that is almost so simple. It's almost taken for granted. But in this day of technology and social and sales acceleration, it actually is the most simple things that get the best results. So I added a little bit of a section here at the end, and I know we're coming up against the time, but I did want to touch on this concept of managing the effectiveness of your reps, because when you're on the phone with your customers and with your prospects, there's a tremendous amount of intelligence that's happening on that phone line. The conversational indicators, the duration, the attempt, the outcome. But as far as from the voice communication, the actual interaction elements, there's such a rich source of intelligence on good practices, bad practices. What is a rep saying? How does a rep handle an objection or a mention of your competitor? What are the techniques, the qualitative techniques that your best reps use on the telephone when they're talking to customers and prospects that ultimately get results? Now, typically, unless you're in a big call center, you don't have access to that qualitative audio of the customer and the rep talking amongst themselves. You know, that's been very prohibitive over time. But if you can get your arms around that qualitative activity, the conversation itself, and use technology to basically identify what meaningful things are happening on those calls, it really does supercharge your ability. Now you're managing the quantitative and the qualitative aspects of your team, regardless of where they happen to be making their calls, regardless of where they reside, or any of that stuff. You know, call recording analytics is a known quantity, and it has been for a while, but for the longest time, it's been really relegated to call centers. It requires a lot of equipment, maintenance. You need supervisors, quality assurance folks pouring through all this call data. And in more distributed or non-centralized environments, it really wasn't an option. In a branch environment or a field, forget it. Now that's all changed. Now stereo high-quality recordings can be captured from any device, anywhere that a rep happens to be. And what's even more important is that analytics can now be applied to those conversations in a way that doesn't make you have to listen to every single one of these calls or carve out 5% of your month to listen to calls from each rep to try to find that needle in the haystack. Now you can basically have that needle find you through the effective use of speech analytics. This slide here shows 14.5% year-over-year drop in sales attainment in 2015 in general, according to Aberdeen. Cross-selling and upselling effectiveness for clients that use speech analytics is 4 times higher than ones that don't. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because the ones that do have a much clearer understanding of what's being said, of what's being replied to, of how to handle an objection, how to adhere to a script. Does the script work or does it not work? Well, it depends on who's giving it, how they're giving it, and what the customer response is. So it really is the ability to supercharge your management by effective application of speech analytics and recording, not for the call centers, not for an inbound customer service organization necessarily, but also for outbound in a targeted way. And for the clients that deploy it, again, now you have the ability to understand why calls convert versus the ones that don't, who's better at it, and what techniques and phrases and words are being conducted on the calls that are most effective. You got to identify things like rep confidence. Do they use a lot of like these things that you want to be able to coach away, but the only way you can do that is if you hear it happening on a repeated basis. And you can't really do that without something like analytics unless you want to hire somebody to comb through audio all day long. Understanding what emotions are being conveyed. Is a rep using profanity, or is a customer using profanity? What are they saying? Certain keywords and phrases that our clients like to monitor, like guarantee, or 30–40% increase. They want to know if the customer mentions competitors more than 3 times in a conversation. Whatever it is that you want to stay on top of, these are the things that speech analytics can be configured so that it gets sent to you automatically. You don't even have to go in and sift through data to find it. It finds you. So there's a tremendous opportunity here, if not now, down the road, in a targeted deployment of speech analytics. And I say targeted because speech analytics is a gigantic thing, and it can get immediately overwhelming. But if you take all this great insight and you narrow it down to the 2 or 3 things on conversational interactions that are most important to you, start there and begin to identify what your reps are saying and doing, showcase the best calls and make it a monthly thing, and identify bad behaviors before they become chronic at a point that you can actually make a difference and adjust them. So at the end of the day, I think the key thing, and we touched on this with one of the questions, in order to increase the effectiveness of your sales team, you want to measure to a standard. You want to make sure that the activity that you're basing your management style on is accurate, is not subjective, and is pretty comprehensive. In the way of sort of driving that overall effectiveness, you want to create a culture of oversight. Not surveillance, but oversight of the activity. You have to be able to manage and measure and improve the activities to increase the likelihood of the positive outcomes. That's critical. You need to do it consistently, meaning on a regular basis. The reps need to know that this is a tool in your toolbox, and this is what they can expect as being a part of the team. And in our experience, most of the reps welcome that. It's not something they object to. It's not something that they repel against. When they know why you're doing it, to help them make more money and to increase their efficiency while also increasing the efficiency of the organization, they tend to understand it a lot better. And then finally, always, you want to set standards and you want to set a baseline, but you also want to consistently review that standard, optimize it. Once you set a goal of 30 calls a day, you start getting the results you need, maybe you bump it up to 32 or 33, and then review, see what happened as a result of that change, and make your decisions. It's an evolutionary process that you want to continuously be reviewing, and if you can do these things, along with being able to accurately capture this activity, you can see 15, 20% improvement of effectiveness of your average rep. We've seen it before, and we feel very, very strongly that this is something that any organization, small, large, in the middle, can take advantage of today. So that's all I had. Does anybody have any additional questions, Gerhard?
We are almost out of time, but here's one final question. Have you analyzed the effectiveness of scripting? And I really love that question. I'd like to hear your response.
Excellent. Yes. Well, there's two types of script adherence. There's script adherence for a large segment of our financial services clients. It's really just script adherence to take an application or read a legal disclosure while they're having a conversation with a customer, opening an account, that type of thing. And then there's also script adherence with cold calling and prospecting around, let's do some testing around which scripts tend to work best based on the different audiences, the different campaigns, and then ultimately the different reps that are making the actual, that are using the script themselves. So it's incredibly important to be able to do testing against the different scripts from a sales perspective. You want to identify what works and promote what works more to a wider group, and really quickly identify the scripts that maybe aren't as effective and replace them with ones that happen to be. So with speech analytics, the script adherence, you really do get a real clear understanding as to what's working and what's not. And the point is that you have to be able to hear what the customer's response to those scripts are. See how they respond well to them, even if you have a script around objection handling, or tell me about your competition. How do you stack up to them? I think in general, if you can get it down to bullet points as opposed to word for word and coach the reps to be a little bit more conversational, you're going to get better results. But there's no better example of the power of speech analytics than looking at different scripts, applying those scripts to different campaigns, and then measuring the overall outcomes of campaigns that use those scripts and then fine-tuning it over time. It's almost impossible to do that without something like speech analytics with any sort of precision.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Eric, for this illuminating presentation. Everybody was very engaged, so people can get in touch with you by calling that number. And we're going to send out that white paper. We have recorded this session today, and we will send everybody a link. And if anybody wants more information, here's the number. And I want to thank everybody for investing their time and contributing great questions. Eric, you have the final word.
Thank you very much, folks. I really appreciate you taking the time. Hopefully it was time well spent. I really firmly believe that measuring the activities that your sales reps are conducting is going to ultimately drive the effectiveness of the revenue and the outcomes that you're all here tasked to work with. And it's a win-win for everybody, and I'm happy to have had the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about it today.